Kelvori homeworld was a quiet place. It had always been quiet. The Kelvori were not a loud people. They did not build massive cities that scraped the clouds. They did not launch 1,000 warships into the stars to show off their power.
The unbroken promise is ready.
Gentle in nature.
Affirmative.
And
Proceed
they
with
lived on
final
a warm
loading
green
protocols.
planet called Kelvori Prime, deep inside a system of 4 moons that turned slowly around their inner sun. For 200 years, they had been part of the galactic sovereignty. That was the name of the great alliance of species that governed most of the known galaxy. It had hundreds of members, empires, federations, collectives, all bound together by treaties and agreements that had taken centuries to build. The sovereignty
unbroken
had its
promise
own
is ready.
council, its own
Affirmative.
laws, its
Proceed
own
with
fleets.
final loading
It was
protocols.
supposed to protect its members. The Kelvori had always believed that. They believed it right up until the day the Vorkai came. The Vorkai Dominion was not a new enemy. They had been known to the galaxy for almost a century. They were large, powerful, and they were cruel in a very organized way. They did not attack out of anger or madness. They attacked because they calculated that they could win, and winning was what they did.
The
One by
unbroken
one,
promise
over
is
30
ready.
years, they had consumed 12
Affirmative.
civilizations.
Proceed with final
Some
loading
fought
protocols.
back, some ran, some tried to negotiate. It did not matter. The Vorkai always came, and the Vorkai always won. When their fleet crossed into the Kelvori system, there was no warning, no message, no demand. Just ships, hundreds of them, appearing at the edge of sensor range like a dark wall moving through the stars. Elder Sathran was the first official to be told. He was an
The
old
unbroken
Kelvori
promise is
with
ready.
deep green scales and eyes
Affirmative.
the color
Proceed
of
with
pale
final
gold.
loading protocols.
He had spent most of his long life in service to his people. He had attended sovereignty meetings. He had signed treaties. He had shaken hands with the Kelvori equivalent, with beings from 100 different worlds. He had truly believed, that the sovereignty was a structure worth trusting. When the young soldier brought him the sensor report and placed it on the table in front of him, Sathric sat very still for a long time.
The
He read
unbroken
numbers.
promise is ready.
340
Affirmative.
Vorkai
Proceed with
warships,
final loading
moving
protocols.
at a steady pace, aimed directly at Kelvori Prime. He did not panic. He was too old for panic. He picked up the communication line and called the Sovereignty Council. The line connected after a short wait. A smooth, artificial voice informed him that the council was in session and could not be interrupted. He left a message. Then he sent an emergency transmission. A priority
unbroken
signal
promise
that
is
was
ready.
supposed to bypass
Affirmative.
all normal
Proceed with
channels
final
and
loading
reach the
protocols.
council's emergency desk immediately. He received an automated reply. His transmission had been received. Someone would respond within 48 hours. 48 hours. The Vorkai fleet would reach Kelvori Prime in 30. Sathrek closed his eyes. He breathed slowly. Then he stood up, straightened his robes, and walked to the communications tower at the center of the capital.
The unbroken promise is
The
ready.
tower was an old building.
Affirmative.
It had been
Proceed
built
with final
long
loading
before the
protocols.
sovereignty, back when the Kelvori were just beginning to reach beyond their own moons. It had tall walls and wide windows, and from the top floor, you could see almost the entire capital city, the low curved buildings, the long green fields at the edges of town, the rivers that caught the amber light of the sun and turned it to something almost gold. Sathrek looked at his city for a moment. Then he went inside
The
and
unbroken
told the
promise is ready.
communications team what he
Affirmative.
needed.
Proceed with
He
final
needed
loading
to broadcast
protocols.
a distress signal, not just to the sovereignty, to everyone. A wideband transmission on every known frequency, aimed in every direction, carrying a simple message. The Kelvori were under attack. They were a peaceful people. They had done nothing wrong. They needed help. The team worked through the night. They built the signal. They aimed it at every major civilization they had contact information for.
The
Fremen
unbroken promise
Empire,
is ready.
the Asavari
Affirmative.
Collective,
Proceed
the
with final
Mullen
loading
Federation,
protocols.
the Dureshi Commonwealth, dozens of others. They sent it just before dawn. Then they waited. Velnoma was not an important person. She was aware of this. She worked a mid-level communications desk at a sovereignty relay station that nobody had a strong reason to visit. The station sat at the edge of a quiet sector, mostly processing routine trading notifications and
The unbroken
occasional
promise is
scientific
ready.
report. It was not
Affirmative.
exciting
Proceed
work.
with final
It
loading
was
protocols.
steady, organized work, and Vel Noma was a steady, organized person. She was a Lasara, a species with thin gray skin, 4 long fingers on each hand, and large dark eyes built for reading screens in low light. She had been working this desk for 6 years. She was good at her job in the way that very careful people are good at quiet jobs. She noticed things, small things. She filed everything neatly.
The unbroken promise
She never
is ready.
ignored a signal just because it
Affirmative.
looked
Proceed with
unimportant.
final loading
The
protocols.
Kelvori distress transmission reached her station 11 minutes after it was sent. Vel Noma flagged it immediately. She pulled up the full message. She read it 3 times. Then she reached for the emergency routing console and began forwarding it to the Council's active attention queue. Not the normal queue, not the 48-hour queue, but the one reserved for genuine crises. The system
The
rejected
unbroken
her
promise
request.
is ready.
She blinked.
Affirmative.
She
Proceed
tried
with final
again.
loading
The
protocols.
system told her that the Kelvori distress signal had already been received and logged by the Council, and that the matter was under review. Under review. She sat back in her chair. She looked at the signal again. She looked at the coordinates. She looked at the number of Volkai ships. She pulled up the Sovereignty's response database, the log of all active emergency requests and their current status.
The
The
unbroken
Kelvori
promise is
signal
ready.
was there.
Affirmative.
Its status
Proceed
read,
with final
pending
loading
assessment,
protocols.
Secondary priority. Secondary priority. Vel Noma stared at that for a long time. She had been working at this desk for 6 years. She had seen how the Council moved. She had seen what pending assessment meant in real terms. It meant that someone somewhere had looked at the Kelvori situation and decided that the political cost of responding was higher than the political cost of doing nothing. It meant
The
that
unbroken
behind
promise is
closed
ready.
doors, in quiet
Affirmative.
rooms,
Proceed with
powerful
final
beings
loading
were already
protocols.
calculating whether the Kelvori were worth the trouble. She already knew the answer going to arrive at her, because she had seen this before, not with the Kelvori, but with others. She turned back to her screens. The distress signal was still going out. It was broadcasting in every direction, carrying its message into the dark between stars. And as she watched the logs update in real time, she
The
began
unbroken
to see
promise
the
is ready.
responses, or rather,
Affirmative.
the lack
Proceed
of them.
with final loading
The
protocols.
Threnai Empire acknowledged receipt of the signal. They expressed deep concern. They would raise the matter at the next full council assembly, scheduled in 9 days. 9 days. The Asavari Collective sent a formal note expressing their sympathy for the Kelvori people and their strong belief that diplomatic channels should be exhausted before any military consideration was made.
The unbroken promise is
The
ready.
Moran Federation did not
Affirmative.
respond
Proceed
at all.
with final loading protocols.
One by one, the great powers of the sovereignty went quiet. Some sent polite words, some sent nothing. Not one of them sent ships. Vel Noma watched the responses come in and not come in, and she felt something she did not have a precise word for. It was not quite anger. It was not quite sadness. It was the feeling of watching something you always feared was true become true in front of your eyes. She
The
leaned
unbroken
forward
promise
and
is
began
ready.
closing the active
Affirmative.
monitoring windows
Proceed with
one by
final
one.
loading protocols.
There was no point watching anymore. The signal was dying in the dark. She had her job to finish. She would file the logs, mark the responses, and close out the relay window before the end of her shift. She reached for the last window, the one that was still showing the raw incoming data from the signal's broadcast, and her finger stopped. There was something there. A small entry, almost
The unbroken
invisible in
promise
the
is
stream
ready.
of data. An
Affirmative.
automated
Proceed with
acknowledgement
final
ping,
loading
not from
protocols.
any sovereignty member, not from any known major civilization. It came from a direction that, when she checked against her charts, pointed toward a region of space that was mostly empty on the official maps. Low development space, the outer edge of the Orion Arm. She almost closed it. It was probably a relay echo. Those happen sometimes, a signal bouncing off a station and coming back looking like a new
The unbroken
response.
promise is ready.
Then she saw the
Affirmative.
timestamp.
Proceed with final
The
loading
acknowledgement
protocols.
had come back in 4 minutes and 17 seconds. Velnoma went very still. She knew the distances. She had been working with signal times and distances for 6 years. Whatever had sent that ping was not a relay echo. It was not a passive bounce off some dead station. Something had received the Kilgore signal. Something had read it, and something had sent back a confirmation.
The unbroken promise is
note,
ready.
Not a diplomatic
Affirmative.
reply.
Proceed
Not a
with
promise
final
to
loading
discuss the matter.
protocols.
Just a clean, direct acknowledgement that said, in the simple language of deep space communications, message received, understood, acting. Acting. That one word made her hand stop moving. She pulled the ping source data and ran it through her location charts. The coordinates resolved slowly, overlapping with sparse old survey files from about 40 years ago. A small
The
system,
unbroken promise is
one
ready.
inhabited planet.
Affirmative.
A species
Proceed with
that the
final loading
sovereignty had
protocols.
cataloged briefly and mostly ignored. They had been given a standard file of young civilization, early spaceflight, not yet considered significant. The species was called human. The planet was called Earth. Velnoma had never spoken to a human. She had barely read the sovereignty file on it. Nobody paid much attention to Earth. They were a new species, only 80 years into real space
The unbroken
travel.
promise is
They had a
ready.
handful of colony
Affirmative.
ships,
Proceed
a few
with final
research
loading
stations,
protocols.
some small defense vessels. They were considered a minor presence, background noise. She read the acknowledgement pinging. Then she ran a calculation. If something had already turned around and started moving toward the Kilgore system at the moment the ping was sent, how long would it take to arrive? The number on her screen made her blink. She ran it again. Same number.
The
She
unbroken
sat
promise
very
is ready.
quietly in her low-lit
Affirmative.
station,
Proceed
in a
with
part
final
of the
loading
galaxy
protocols.
that nobody particularly cared about. And she looked at that number, and for the first time in a very long time, she felt something shift inside her chest. She did not close the window. Back on Kilgore Prime, the hours moved slowly and heavily. The planetary defense forces, small, under-equipped, designed for border incidents rather than full invasions, were doing what they could. Every ship that could fly was
The
being
unbroken
armed.
promise is ready.
Every ground installation
Affirmative.
was powered
Proceed
up.
with final loading
Sathrek
protocols.
had ordered the civilian population away from the coastal cities and into the inland shelters. It was not enough. Everyone knew it was not enough. But they did it anyway, because doing something was better than standing still. The soldiers were young. Most of them had never seen real combat. They moved through their duties with a kind of quiet determination that Sathrek found both admirable and heartbreaking. They checked their equipment.
The unbroken promise
They ran
is ready.
their drills. They did not
Affirmative.
talk
Proceed
much.
with final loading protocols.
Sathrek walked among them sometimes in the long hours before the Vorkai arrived. He did not have inspiring speeches to give. He was not that kind of leader. He walked, and he looked at his people, and he felt the full weight of what was coming. He had received the sovereignty's response by now. The careful language, the deep concern, the promise of review. He had read it once and put it away and not looked at it again.
The unbroken
He had
promise
also
is ready.
received the logs from the
Affirmative.
communications
Proceed
tower.
with final
He
loading
had seen
protocols.
the tally of responses from across the galaxy. He was not surprised. He was old enough to not be surprised by this kind of thing anymore. He had always known, somewhere deep and quiet inside him, that when it came to it, the great powers would weigh the cost and find it too high. What surprised him, what he thought about as he stood at the tower window looking out at the amber evening light, was the one small ping that had come
The
back
unbroken
from a
promise is
direction
ready.
nobody expected.
Affirmative.
His
Proceed with final loading
communications officer
protocols.
had shown it to him. She was young, barely out of training, and she had looked at Sathrek with wide gold eyes as she explained what the ping meant. He had listened without expression. When she finished, he asked her to show him the coordinates. He looked at the coordinates for a long time. Earth, he had heard the name distantly, the way you hear the name of a small town far away that you have no reason to visit.
The
A
unbroken
young
promise is
species,
ready.
new to the star.
Affirmative. Proceed
Not
with final
significant,
loading protocols.
according to everyone who had an opinion on such things. They had answered in 4 minutes. Not with words, not with diplomatic language, with a moving ship. Sathrek turned away from the window. He walked back to his desk and sat down. Outside, the sun was going down behind the four moons, and the sky was turning from amber to deep purple, and somewhere out in the dark, 340 Volkai
The unbroken promise is ready.
closer with every passing
Affirmative.
minute.
Proceed with final
He thought
loading
about
protocols.
Earth, about a species he had never met, moving through the dark toward a world they had no reason to care about. He did not know why they were coming. He did not know what they could possibly do when they got here. He did not know if it would matter. But they had answered. In the quiet of his office, with the weight of everything pressing down on him, Elder Safric allowed himself one small, private feeling. It was
The
not
unbroken
hope.
promise is
It was
ready.
something quieter than hope.
Affirmative.
It was
Proceed
the
with final
feeling of
loading
not being
protocols.
completely alone in the dark. He sat with that feeling for a little while. Then he got back to work. Outside, the last light faded from the sky over Kilgore Prime, and the stars came out one by one, cold and bright and very far away. Somewhere among them, something was moving, something that had not been asked to come, something that had received a signal without discussion, without calculation,
The
without
unbroken
asking
promise is
what it would
ready.
cost, had simply
Affirmative.
turned around
Proceed
and
with
started
final loading
moving toward
protocols.
the sound of someone calling for help. The night settled over the capital city. The soldiers kept their watch. The shelters filled with families who held their children close and spoke in quiet voices. The amber moon rose over the eastern hills and cast long shadows across the empty streets. And the signal went on broadcasting into the dark, over and over, carrying its simple message to anyone who
The
would listen.
unbroken promise is ready.
Most of the galaxy had
Affirmative.
already decided
Proceed with
not
final
to.
loading protocols.
But somewhere far away, at the edge of the Orion Arm, a fleet was moving through the night between stars, and it was moving fast. The signal reached Geneva in 3:40 hours. Most of the city was asleep. The streets were quiet. The lake sat still and dark under a cloudy sky. The lights of the United Nations Defense Command Building were the only bright thing on the waterfront that hour. They were
The
always
unbroken
on,
promise is ready.
always bright. Because the
Affirmative.
people who
Proceed
worked
with
inside
final
them
loading
had
protocols.
long ago accepted that trouble does not keep regular hours. Admiral Seraphine Akafor was in the middle of a briefing when the duty officer knocked and opened the door. She was a tall woman, not tall in a way that announced itself, just tall and straight and steady, the way old trees are steady. Her hair was cut short and going gray at the edges. She wore her uniform the way she wore everything without thinking about it. Because
The
it had been
unbroken
part of her
promise
life
is ready.
for so long it was just her
Affirmative.
skin now.
Proceed with
Her
final
eyes
loading
were dark
protocols.
brown and very clear, and when she looked at you, you had the feeling she was reading something behind your face that you did not know was written there. She had been up since 200. That was normal. The duty officer handed her a printed transcript of the signal. She read it while the other people in the room waited. She read it the way she read everything, carefully, completely, without rushing. When she reached the end, she went
The
back
unbroken
and read
promise
the part
is
about
ready.
the Volkai fleet again.
Affirmative. Proceed with
Then
final
she set
loading
the paper
protocols.
down on the table and looked at the duty officer. Who else has it? She asked. Everyone, the officer said. It's a wideband broadcast. The whole galaxy has it. Who's responded? The officer's mouth pressed into a thin line. The sovereignty is reviewing it. The Thren I sent a note. Nobody's moving. Akafor nodded once. She looked at the paper again. She looked
The
at the
unbroken
coordinates.
promise is ready.
She did the math in her head.
Affirmative.
Then she
Proceed
stood
with
up.
final loading protocols.
Get me the authorization codes, she said, and wake up the fleet commanders. The briefing room went very quiet for a moment. Not because people were afraid, because people were listening to the sound of something beginning. Admiral, said one of the senior officers at the table, a man named General Fox, broad-shouldered, careful, the kind of person who liked to be sure about things before he moved. You don't have
The
a
unbroken
sovereignty
promise is
mandate for
ready.
this. The Kelvori
Affirmative.
aren't
Proceed
under our
with final
protection.
loading protocols.
Legally speaking, 12 civilizations are wrong, Akafor said. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. And the 13th is asking for help. I'm going to give it to them. General Foss looked at her for a moment. Then he nodded and reached for his communication device. Within 20 minutes, the building was fully awake. The UES Yes, Unbroken Promise was the
Unbroken
largest
Promise
warship
is ready.
Earth had ever built.
Affirmative.
It was
Proceed
not
with final
large the
loading
way some
protocols.
alien ships were large, not designed to be impressive from a distance, not built with grand curves and ornamental structures meant to signal power to other civilizations. It was large the way a working tool is large, because the job required it. Every part of it had a purpose. Every piece of its hull plating was there for a reason. It was a ship that had been built by people who understood war and were not romantic about it.
The Unbroken
Commander
Promise is
Darius
ready.
Salam was in the middle
Affirmative.
of a training
Proceed with
exercise
final loading
when the order
protocols.
came through. He was in the tactical simulation room on Deck 7, working through a multi-vector defense problem with his team. He was 38 years old, dark-skinned, with a permanent small frown that was not unfriendliness but concentration, the expression of a man who was always thinking about the next problem before the current one was finished. He was very good at his job. His job was figuring out how to win fights, and he had a talent for it.
The Unbroken Promise is ready.
He thought sideways.
Affirmative. Proceed with final
He
loading
saw angles
protocols.
that other tacticians missed. His teams sometimes found him frustrating to work with, because he would make a decision that looked strange, and 3 steps later it would become obvious and brilliant. When the order came through, he read it, turned to his team and said, "Pack it up. We have a real one." Nobody asked questions. They packed it up. Dr. Yumiko Hara was in the quarters reading, and she
The
received
Unbroken
her
Promise is
notification.
ready.
She was the ship's head
Affirmative.
of
Proceed with
xenodiplomacy,
final loading
the
protocols.
person responsible for communicating with alien civilizations, understanding their cultures, finding the words that build bridges instead of walls. She was a small woman with a calm face and very precise hands, and she read twice as fast as most people and forgot almost nothing. She read her notification. Then she pulled up everything in the ship's database on the board. It was not a lot. The sovereignty's file
The
on them
Unbroken
was
Promise
thin.
is ready.
She read it in 20 minutes and
Affirmative.
thought about
Proceed
it
with
for
final
another
loading
10.
protocols.
Then she got dressed and went to work. Chief Engineer Bram Olsen was already in the engine room when the order came through. This was not unusual. Bram was almost always in the engine room. He was a heavy man, not fat but dense, as if he had been built more solidly than other people. He had enormous hands that were always slightly dirty and a slow, quiet way of speaking that made people assume he was slow and quiet in his thinking too. He was
The
not.
Unbroken Promise
He was
is
one
ready.
of the fastest problem solvers
Affirmative.
on the ship.
Proceed with final loading
He
protocols.
just did not feel the need to announce it. He read the order. He nodded to himself. He called his team together and told them they were moving on emergency deployment, that the drives needed to be at full readiness in 3 hours, and that anyone who needed sleep should get it now, because they were not going to get much once they were underway. Then he went back to what he had been doing, which was fixing a small seal on an auxiliary
The Unbroken
power
Promise is
conduit
ready.
that nobody else had
Affirmative.
noticed was showing
Proceed with
early
final
wear.
loading protocols.
He fixed it quietly and thoroughly, and moved on to the next thing. The fleet assembled in the dark. Not just the Unbroken Promise. 487 ships in total, gathering from across the solar system and the near colonies. Carriers, dreadnoughts, destroyers, frigates, fast response gunships that could cross a combat zone in seconds and hit hard before anyone had time to react. Supply
The Unbroken
ships,
Promise is
medical
ready.
transports,
Affirmative.
ships
Proceed with
designed
final
for
loading
functions
protocols.
that most other civilizations had not yet thought of, because humans had a way of building solutions to problems before the problems fully arrived. The gathering took 6 hours. To an outside observer, to someone watching from the Sovereignty's relay stations, for example, it must have looked strange. A species that the galaxy barely paid attention to, mobilizing their entire military presence.
The
and
Unbroken
pointing
Promise
it
is
toward
ready.
A conflict that had nothing to do
Affirmative.
with them.
Proceed with
In
final
a
loading
star
protocols.
system they had no official interest in, for a people they had barely met. It would have looked strange, yes, but the crews of those 487 ships would not have found it strange at all, because they knew the story. Most of them had grown up with it. It was not a famous story in the galaxy. The Sovereignty had not recorded it in any significant way, but on Earth and in every human
The
colony,
Unbroken
it
Promise
was
is
something
ready.
people knew.
Affirmative.
It was part of the
Proceed with
texture
final
of things,
loading protocols.
one of those pieces of history that you absorb without being formally taught, because the people around it carry it when it passes through the air. The story is about the Vanry plague. In 2291, a disease had moved through the human colonies. It had started on one of the outer stations and traveled faster than anyone expected, faster than the containment teams could move. Within 8 months, it had reached
The
Earth
unbroken
itself.
promise is ready.
It was killing people across every
Affirmative.
continent.
Proceed with final
The
loading
hospitals
protocols.
could not keep up. The research labs were running around the clock and making no progress. The projections were terrible. The most cautious estimates said that without a solution within 2 years, 30% of the human population would be gone. The less cautious estimates were worse. The sovereignty had sent notes of sympathy. But while the great powers were writing their notes, a medical transmission arrived
The unbroken
from an
promise is
unexpected
ready.
source. A data
Affirmative.
package,
Proceed with final
enormous,
loading protocols.
detailed, containing biological research that human science had not yet reached. Research on immune response systems that were structurally similar to human biology. Analysis of pathogen behavior that matched the Vanry plague's pattern almost exactly. It had come from the Kilvori. Nobody had asked them. Nobody had known they were working on it. They had received word of the plague from their own long-range
The unbroken
monitors,
promise is
and
ready.
some of their scientists had
Affirmative.
looked at the biology
Proceed with final
involved
loading
and recognized
protocols.
something, a pattern, a connection that they were equipped to address. So they had worked on it, quietly, without announcement, and when they had something useful, they had sent it. It cost them. The sovereignty had not been pleased. The Kilvori had acted outside the official channels. There had been political consequences, slow ones, quiet ones, the kind that show up as reduced trade agreements and less favorable treatment.
The unbroken
at council
promise is
meetings.
ready.
The Kilvori
Affirmative.
had accepted
Proceed with
those
final loading
consequences without
protocols.
complaint and without explanation. The research they sent had saved 70,000 lives in the first year alone. Over time, as the treatment was refined and applied, the full count was higher. The Kilvori had never once mentioned it again. They had not done it for recognition. They had not done it as a bargaining chip. They had done it because they could, and because someone needed help, and
The
those
unbroken
were
promise is
sufficient
ready.
reasons. The
Affirmative.
human
Proceed with
crews who
final
boarded
loading
their ships
protocols.
in those 6 hours of gathering knew all of this, not as a formal briefing, as something they had grown up knowing. The Kilvori helped us when they did not have to. They asked for nothing. They remembered them when no one was watching. Now the Kilvori were calling into the dark, and everyone was ignoring them. Not everyone. Admiral Akafor walked the length of the unbroken promise as it completed
unbroken
its
promise
final
is ready.
pre-jump checks.
Affirmative.
She walked
Proceed
the
with
corridors
final loading
the way
protocols.
she always did before deployment, not inspecting exactly, just being present. She passed through the crew quarters, the medical bay, the tactical operations center, the engineering decks. She said a few words here and there. She did not give speeches. She did not rally people. The people on this ship did not need rallying. She stopped at the door to the engine room and looked in. Bram Osai was at his main console, running
unbroken
through his
promise
checks
is
with
ready.
the slow thoroughness that was
Affirmative.
his signature.
Proceed with final
His
loading
team
protocols.
moved around him efficiently and quietly. Everything looked exactly as it should. Osa looked up and saw her. He nodded once. She nodded back, but that was enough. She made her way to the bridge. The bridge of the unbroken promise was a wide, low-lit space full of screens and quiet voices. The crew were at their stations. Everything had the feeling of coiled readiness, not tension, exactly.
The unbroken
Readiness.
promise is ready.
The feeling of a tool
Affirmative.
that has been cared
Proceed
for
with
and
final
is ready
loading
to do its
protocols.
job. Solano was already at the tactical station. He had 6 screens open and was building a preliminary picture of the Kilvori system from the long-range data they had received. He had notes everywhere. He looked up when Akafor came in, gave her a brief nod, and pointed at the largest screen. 340 Volkai ships, he said. Siege formation. They've been running this pattern
The unbroken
for about
promise
30
is ready.
years. They like to come in
Affirmative.
heavy from
Proceed
one
with
side
final
and
loading
use mass to
protocols.
compress the target's defense line. He paused. It works on people who think the same way they do. Akafor looked at the formation on the screen, and people who don't. Solano's mouth moved in something that was almost a smile. Different story. Dr. Hara arrived on the bridge with a data pad and a quiet expression. She had spent the last few hours going through everything she could find on
The
Kill
unbroken
Vori,
promise is
their
ready.
language, their social
Affirmative.
structures,
Proceed with
their
final
history.
loading protocols.
She had also gone through everything available on the Vorkai, which was less about culture and more about pattern of destruction. The Kelvari don't have a strong military tradition, she said, joining them at the tactical station. They're not built for this kind of fight. Their defense force is real but small. They'll be holding on, but they won't be holding on for long. How long, Micah asked. When we
The
arrived,
unbroken promise
Hara
is ready.
calculated. Maybe hours,
Affirmative.
maybe less.
Proceed with final loading
Akefer
protocols.
nodded. Then we moved fast. She walked to the command chair at the center of the bridge and sat down. Around her, the crew completed their final checks. The fleet was assembled. The drives were ready. The coordinates were locked. She looked at the main screen, where the stars ahead of them were still and quiet. The destination just a point of light among thousands of other points of light. Admiral,
The
said
unbroken
navigation
promise is
officer,
ready.
Fleet is ready
Affirmative.
for jump.
Proceed with final loading
Akefer
protocols.
took one breath, one slow, even breath. Take us out, she said. The unbroken promise moved. Behind it, one by one, 486 other ships followed. The drives ignited in sequence, and the fleet swept forward into the jump corridor, vanishing from normal space in a long, bright line that lasted 3 seconds and then was gone. The solar system went quiet again.
The unbroken promise
On
is
the
ready.
screens of the Sovereignty's monitoring
Affirmative.
stations,
Proceed with final
the
loading
departure
protocols.
was logged as an unusual military movement from a minor species, notable but not urgent. Someone would file a report. Someone else would read it later. But the fleet was already gone. And somewhere ahead, in the amber-lit star system of Kelvori Prime, the Vorkai ships were moving into their final assault positions, and their general stood on his bridge with his hands behind his back.
The
and looked at
unbroken
the planet
promise is
below
ready.
him, and felt
Affirmative.
the particular
Proceed with
satisfaction
final
of a
loading
man who has
protocols.
done this many times and expects to do it many times more. He had no idea what was coming. Nobody did. Except perhaps an old Kelvori elder who stood at a broken window and looked up at the stars and thought about a signal he had sent, and a ping that had come back in 4 minutes and 17 seconds. He had not told anyone about it. He was keeping it quietly.
The unbroken
the way
promise
you
is
keep
ready.
something fragile,
Affirmative.
holding it carefully
Proceed with
so it
final
did not
loading
break before
protocols.
it had the chance to become real. The night outside was dark. The moons were high. The Vorkai ships were visible now with the naked eye and bright moving points of light against the stars, drawing closer with every passing minute. Sathric watched them come, and he waited. The last hour before the bombardment was the quietest hour. On the surface of Kelvori Prime, the capital had gone
The
mostly
unbroken
dark.
promise is ready.
Not a blackout. The power
Affirmative.
was
Proceed
still on
with
in the
final loading
shelters,
protocols.
still running the medical stations and the communication arrays, but the streets were empty. The market squares were empty. The long river walks that the Kelvori loved in the evenings were empty. The city felt like a hell breath. General Vethdrahl stood on the command bridge of his flagship, the Vorkai warship Sovereign Fist, and looked at the planet below him through the wide front window. He was a
The
large
unbroken
being.
promise is ready.
Vorkai were large and
Affirmative.
general, broad,
Proceed with
heavily
final
built,
loading
with
protocols.
dark armored skin that had evolved on a high-gravity world and never quite let go of the thickness that world had demanded. Drahl was older than most of his officers, and the years had not made him soft. They had made him precise. He had been running military campaigns for 22 years. He had participated in the conquest of 6 civilizations personally. He knew how these things went. He knew the rhythms of them, the resistance that
The
starts
unbroken
strong
promise is
and then
ready.
slowly exhausts
Affirmative.
itself.
Proceed with
The
final
moment
loading
when the defending
protocols.
forces realize they cannot win and begin to collapse. The long, careful process of turning a living civilization into a controlled territory. He found the process almost boring now. Not because it was easy. It was always difficult in the details, but it was predictable. Every civilization responded to overwhelming force in the same basic ways. They fought, They ran. They asked for help.
The unbroken
Help did
promise
not
is
come.
ready.
They fought some more.
Affirmative. Proceed with
Eventually,
final
they
loading
stopped.
protocols.
Kelvori had been in the fighting stage. Now they were moving toward the asking for help stage. Draal had seen a distress signal go out. He had monitored the galaxy's response with something approaching amusement. The Threnai sent a note. The Asavari sent a longer note. Nobody moved. This was the part he had always found most useful. The moment when the defending civilization realized that the rest of the galaxy was not going to save them. That
The
moment
unbroken
did more
promise
to
is
break
ready.
resistance than any weapon.
Affirmative. Proceed with
He
final
turned
loading
to his
protocols.
communications officer. Begin the final approach sequence. I want bombardment of the northern defense installation started within the hour. Yes, General. He turned back to the viewport. Below him, Kelvori Prime glowed amber and green in the light of its sun, quiet and small and entirely surrounded. It was going to be a short day. The first sign was on the long-range sensor.
The unbroken promise is
One
ready.
of the Voakai sensor
Affirmative.
operators noticed
Proceed
it
with
first,
final loading
a
protocols.
fluctuation at the edge of the system's detection range. He almost dismissed it. Sensor fluctuations happened. Space was full of things that showed up briefly and then resolved into something normal. He flagged it as routine and moved on. Then the fluctuation happened again. And again. And then it stopped being a fluctuation and became a reading. One ship, then 5,
The unbroken
then
promise
20.
is ready.
Then the readings were
Affirmative.
coming
Proceed
in so
with
fast
final
that
loading
the system
protocols.
was struggling to count them individually and was starting to group them. The sensor operator stared at the screen. He checked his calibration. He ran a diagnostic. Everything was working correctly. He looked at the screen again. He picked up his communication line and called the bridge. Draal was still at the viewport when the call came through. He listened. He did not move for a moment.
The unbroken
Then he
promise
turned
is
around
ready.
and walked to the sensor
Affirmative.
station himself.
Proceed with final
He
loading
looked at the
protocols.
screen. He watched the numbers resolving. He said nothing. The numbers kept climbing. They were past 100 now, past 150. The sensor system had finished its grouping calculation and was now displaying a single consolidated number at the top of the screen, updating every few seconds as new ships dropped out of jump. Past 200, past 300,
The unbroken promise is
past
ready.
400.
Affirmative.
Draal's
Proceed with
sensor
final loading
officer turned
protocols.
to look at him. The young officer's face was carefully controlled, but his hands had tightened on the edge of his console. General, he said quietly, 487 signatures, unknown configuration, moving into combat formation. Draal looked at the number. Then he looked at the formation the ships were taking, which the sensor overlay was beginning to map in basic geometry.
The
It was
unbroken
not
promise
a
is ready.
defensive arc. He
Affirmative.
recognized
Proceed with
defensive
final
arcs.
loading
He
protocols.
had broken through dozens of them. Defensive arcs were what you used when you were trying to protect something. This was not a defensive arc. He knew what a hunting formation looked like too. This was that. Identification, he said. The communications officer ran the query. The answer came back in a few seconds. UES Unbroken Promise, she read. Leading vessel, United
The
Earth
unbroken
Defense
promise is
Command.
ready.
She paused.
Affirmative.
The rest
Proceed
of the
with
fleet
final
is also
loading
registering
protocols.
as Earth vessels general. Draal said the word slowly. Earth. Yes, General. He knew the name. He had a general awareness of most spacefaring civilizations in this part of the galaxy. It was useful information for a man in his position. He pulled what he knew about Earth from memory. Young species, 80 years of serious spaceflight, small presence. No major conflicts on record outside
The
their own
unbroken
system.
promise is ready.
Not sovereignty members
Affirmative.
in full standing.
Proceed with final
By
loading
any measure,
protocols.
a minor player. He looked at the 487 ships currently arranging themselves between him and California Prime. He opened the communication channel himself. He did not usually do this. It was below his rank to speak directly to opposing forces, but he was curious. Earth vessel, he said. This system is under Voakai Dominion authority. You are in a
The
declared
unbroken promise is
military
ready.
zone. Identify
Affirmative.
your purpose
Proceed
and
with
withdraw
final loading
immediately.
protocols.
A brief pause. Then a woman's voice came back, calm, clear, not aggressive. Just matter of fact in the way that people are matter of fact when they have already decided what they are doing and do not particularly need to explain themselves. This is Admiral Seraphine Akafor, United Earth Defense Command. We're here because someone asked for help. A pause that lasted exactly
The unbroken
the right
promise
amount
is
of
ready.
time. You have 20
Affirmative.
minutes to
Proceed
begin
with
your
final
withdrawal.
loading protocols.
After that, we will teach you what 80 years of war looks like. Draw stared at the communications console. Around him, his officers were very quiet. He had been threatened before, many times, by species that had large fleets and long histories of conflict and real military muscle behind the words. He had assessed those threats and decided which ones were real and which ones were posturing.
The unbroken promise is ready.
He looked at 487
Affirmative. Proceed with
ships
final
in
loading
a hunting
protocols.
formation. He thought about the 20 minutes. He had 12 civilizations behind him, 12 conquered worlds. He had not gotten to 12 by being careless with risk assessments. He looked at the formation again. He looked at the way those ships were arranged, not just the numbers, but the geometry. It was not a formation he had seen before. It did not follow any of the tactical patterns his databases contained.
The unbroken
for known
promise is ready.
spacefaring civilizations.
Affirmative.
It was
Proceed
something
with
else.
final loading protocols.
Something that had been built from a different set of assumptions about how a fight should be structured. He did not like that. Hold position, he said to his fleet. Do not begin bombardment. He was not withdrawn, but he was not starting yet either. He was watching. On the unbroken promise, the 20 minutes passed in pure silence. Akafor sat in the command chair. Solano stood at his
The unbroken
tactical
promise
station
is
with
ready.
6 screens active,
Affirmative.
watching
Proceed
the
with
Vorkai
final
fleet's
loading
position
protocols.
updates in real time. Dr. Hara was at the communications desk, monitoring all channels. Bram Osai's voice came through on the internal line periodically with quiet engine status updates, each one the same, all systems ready. At minute 19, Solano looked up from his screens. They're not moving, he said. I know, Akafor said. They think we're
The
bluffing.
unbroken promise is ready.
I know, she said again.
Affirmative. Proceed with
The
final
21st
loading
minute
protocols.
arrived. All fleet, Akafor said into the open channel. Execute pattern Solano 7. Now. What happened next was something that Vorkai sensor operators would try to describe in reports for years after, and never quite managed to capture correctly. The Earth fleet did not charge forward. It did not form a wall and push. It did not do any of the things that a large fleet,
The unbroken
by
promise is
conventional
ready.
doctrine, was supposed to do.
Affirmative. Proceed with final
split.
loading protocols.
Not into 2 parts, into 11. 11 distinct groups of ships, each one moving in a different direction at the same moment, spreading outward from their original formation position like the fingers of a hand opening. The groups moved faster than the Vorkai expected, because the Earth ships had engines built for rapid acceleration rather than sustained top speed. A design choice that made no sense until suddenly it made
The
all the
unbroken
sense
promise
in
is
the world.
ready.
The
Affirmative.
Vorkai fleet
Proceed
was
with
large
final
and it
loading
was
protocols.
powerful, and it was built for the kind of combat that most civilizations fought. 2 forces meeting head-on, mass versus mass, power against power, the heavier side eventually winning. Drahl had won 12 times doing exactly that. His fleet knew how to fight that fight in their sleep. They did not know how to fight this fight. The 11 groups curved around the Vorkai formation from multiple directions simultaneously.
The unbroken promise
3
is
of them
ready.
went high above the orbital
Affirmative.
plane.
Proceed with
2 went
final
deep
loading
below.
protocols.
The others came in from angles that the Vorkai's defensive coverage had not been designed to address, because no enemy in 12 campaigns had ever moved like this. Drahl's ships tried to reorient. He was fast. He was a good commander, genuinely, and he began issuing orders to split his own fleet in response. But his ships were built to hold formation, to move as a single massive fist, and breaking them
The
into
unbroken
smaller
promise is
groups
ready.
went against everything their
Affirmative.
construction
Proceed
and
with
their
final
doctrine
loading
were designed
protocols.
for. The first strikes hit from 3 directions at the same moment. The Vorkai had strong shields. Their armor plating was among the best in the sector. They were built to take punishment and keep functioning, but the Earth fleet did not hit them in the places their armor was strongest. The ships had been watching for 30 seconds, scanning, mapping, looking, and when they struck at the specific points where the Vorkai design left gaps. Not
The
obvious
unbroken
gaps,
promise is ready.
small ones.
Affirmative.
The kind
Proceed
that
with
only
final
mattered
loading
when you knew
protocols.
exactly where to aim. On the Kelvori surface, Elder Safra was watching from the communications tower. The tower's exterior screens showed a rough sensor map of the space above the planet. It was not a perfect picture. The Kelvori sensor equipment was limited, but it showed the broad shapes of what was happening. He could see the large mass of the Vorkai fleet. He could see the smaller, faster shapes of the Earth ships
The
moving
unbroken
around
promise
it like
is ready.
water moving around a stone.
Affirmative.
Not
Proceed with
hitting it
final
straight
loading
on,
protocols.
but finding every crack and flowing into it. The young soldier who had been assigned to stand with him, a private named Teva, barely 20 years old, with bright amber eyes and a way of holding her weapon like she was trying to convince herself it would be enough, watched the screen with wide eyes. "Who are they?" she asked quietly. The elder was quiet for a moment. He watched one of the Earth ships perform
The unbroken
a maneuver
promise
that
is
made
ready.
no logical sense.
Affirmative.
Until
Proceed
it
with
suddenly
final
revealed
loading
a
protocols.
Volkai vessel's unprotected flank, and then it made complete sense. "The ones we helped," he said, "a long time ago." Teva looked at him, then she looked back at the screen. "They came," she said. It was not quite a question. It was the sound of someone watching something they had mostly stopped believing in becoming real in front of them. "They came," Safra said. The battle lasted 4
The unbroken
hours
promise
and
is
17
ready.
minutes.
Affirmative.
There were moments
Proceed
when
with
it was
final
not
loading
going well.
protocols.
3 Earth ships were destroyed in the first 40 minutes. The Vorkai were not helpless, and their weapons were powerful. And in the sections of the fight where they managed to get Earth vessels into the kind of direct confrontation they were built for, they were dangerous. 14 people died on the destroyer UES Resolute when a Vorkai energy burst found a seam in its hull. The UES Meridian took heavy damage to its engine section
The unbroken
and had
promise
to
is
pull
ready.
back from the line. The
Affirmative.
crew
Proceed
of the
with
small
final
frigate
loading
Crosswind
protocols.
held their position for 20 minutes against 3 Vorkai ships twice their size, buying time for a flanking group to get into position. And when the flanking group arrived, the Crosswind had taken damage to 11 of its 14 systems and was running on reserve power, but it was still there. On the tactical station of the Unbroken Promise, Solano was everywhere at once. Not physically, he stayed at the station, his hands
The
moving
unbroken
across his
promise is
screens,
ready.
his voice calm and
Affirmative.
continuous
Proceed
on the
with
fleet
final
channels.
loading protocols.
But his mind was in every corner of the fight. He was watching patterns. He was watching how the Vorkai would adapt. Every time they found a new response to the Earth fleet's movements, Solano was already building a counter to it before they finished implementing it. He was 2 steps ahead, and staying there through sheer concentrated thinking. "Group 7, pull left," he said into his channel. "Don't let them establish that
The unbroken
angle. Group
promise
7
is ready.
left now, and Group 3
Affirmative.
swing
Proceed
wide
with
to
final
cover the
loading
gap."
protocols.
The ships moved. The gap closed. A Vorkai flanking attempt collapsed before it formed. Akafra watched the tactical picture evolve. She gave direction on the big decisions and left the fine details to Salam, because that was the right way to use him and she knew it. She watched the Vorkai numbers. She watched them take hits and absorb them and come back. She watched them take hits and not absorb
The
them and
unbroken
slow
promise
down.
is ready.
She watched the ratio
Affirmative.
shift
Proceed
slowly
with final
in one
loading
direction.
protocols.
In the engine room, Bram Osa was managing a crisis that most of the ship did not know about. The third direct hit the Unbroken Promise had taken and sent a shockwave through the secondary power distribution system. Nothing catastrophic, but 2 relays were showing stress fractures, and if they failed, it would reduce the ship's main drive output by 30%. 30% reduced drive output.
The unbroken
meant
promise is ready.
30% reduced maneuverability.
Affirmative. Proceed with final loading
30%
protocols.
reduced maneuverability at this point in the fight could matter. Bose had 3 engineers on him. He was also one himself, his large hands moving with a delicacy that seemed impossible given their size. Replacing a relay component while the ship continued its combat maneuvers around him, and the deck shook every few minutes from weapons fire. He finished, he ran the diagnostic. The fractures
The
were
unbroken
contained.
promise is ready.
He keyed his line to
Affirmative.
the bridge.
Proceed with final
Engine
loading
systems
protocols.
nominal, he said. On the bridge, nobody knew anything had been wrong. The turning point came at the 3-hour mark. The Volkai fleet had been slowly compressing under the pressure of the Earth formation, not because they had broken, but because they were being systematically cut off from each other. The 11 groups had been, over 3 hours, very carefully herded. The casual observer watching the battle might have thought it was chaotic.
The unbroken promise is ready.
It was a slow,
Affirmative.
patient,
Proceed
deliberate
with final
process
loading
of reduction.
protocols.
Each move had been building toward a specific geometry. At 3 hours and 4 minutes, that geometry was complete. The Volkai fleet was, for the first time in any of its 12 campaigns, completely surrounded. Not just outmaneuvered, not just under pressure from multiple sides, completely enclosed in a sphere of Earth vessels, every escape angle covered, every retreat
The
path
unbroken
blocked
promise
by a
is
ship
ready.
or a group of ships
Affirmative.
positioned
Proceed
exactly
with
to
final
cut it
loading
off.
protocols.
Drawl stood at his tactical station and looked at the display and understood what had happened. He had been managed. For 3 hours, this fleet of Earth ships, this young species, this minor civilization, these 80-year spaceflight newcomers had been managing him, moving him, not fighting him directly, but guiding him slowly, patiently, step by step, into exactly the position they wanted him in.
The
He had
unbroken
not
promise
seen
is
it
ready.
happening.
Affirmative.
He saw it now.
Proceed with final loading
His
protocols.
flagship had taken significant damage. His fleet had lost 40 vessels, not destroyed mostly, but damaged enough to pull out of the fight. The remaining 300 ships were inside a sphere of Earth vessels, and the Earth vessels were moving inward. Drow stood very still for a long moment. He was not a man who felt fear easily, but he was a man who knew when a calculation had gone wrong.
The
He had built
unbroken
his
promise
career
is
on
ready.
honest assessments of
Affirmative.
situations.
Proceed with final loading
The honest
protocols.
assessment of this situation was clear. He opened the channel to his fleet. His voice when it came was different from the voice he had used at the start of the day. Not broken, not panicked, just quiet. All vessels, he said, fall back. The sovereign fist turned. Behind it, the Volkai fleet turned with it. They moved for the edge of the system, and the Earth ships let them go, not out
The
of mercy,
unbroken promise is
exactly,
ready.
but because Akafor
Affirmative.
had given
Proceed with
specific
final
orders
loading
that
protocols.
pursuit beyond the system boundary was not the objective. The objective was the Kilvori system. The objective was the planet below. The objective was already achieved. On the surface of Kilvori Prime, Teva watched the Volkai ships moving away on the screen. She watched until the last one cleared the edge of the sensor net. Then she turned to Elder Safdie. He was still looking at the screen.
The
His
unbroken
old
promise
gold
is
eyes
ready.
were very calm and
Affirmative.
very bright.
Proceed with final
Is
loading
it over?
protocols.
Teva asked. This part, he said. Above them, in the quiet of the now empty orbital space, the Earth fleet began to regroup. Ships moved back to formation. The damaged ones were flagged. The ones that needed help received it. The communications channels opened up, not for tactical commands anymore, but for damage reports, checks, the practical business of taking stock of what had just happened.
The unbroken promise
On the
is ready.
unbroken promise,
Affirmative.
Admiral
Proceed
Akafor
with
sat in
final
her
loading
command chair
protocols.
and looked at the main screen, where Kilvori Prime turned slowly in the light of its amber sun. Green and quiet, and for the moment safe. Solano came to stand beside her. 41 Volkai ships in retreat, he said. Remaining 300 withdrawn. Long-range tracking shows them clearing the system. He paused. We lost 14 people. The Meridian will need major repair.
The unbroken promise is ready.
The crew is all accounted
Affirmative.
for. They're
Proceed
banged
with
up, but
final loading
nobody's
protocols.
gone. Akafor listened to all of this. She nodded. Get me a channel to the surface, she said. The communications officer opened. Akafor leaned forward slightly. Kilvori Prime, this is Admiral Akafor, United Earth Defense Command. The Volkai fleet has withdrawn from your system. We are in orbit. We are not leaving until you tell us to. Is there anything you
The
need
unbroken
right now?
promise is ready.
A long pause.
Affirmative. Proceed with
Then a
final
voice
loading
came
protocols.
through. Old, careful, carrying inside it something that was too large to fully express in words. Yes, said Elder Sappho. We need our people to know that it is safe to come home. Akefer closed her eyes for just a moment. Tell them, she said, it's safe. The day after was gray and still. A light rain fell on the capital city of Kilvori Prime, soft and steady. The kind of rain
The unbroken
that does not
promise
ask
is
anything
ready.
of you, just falls and
Affirmative.
makes everything
Proceed with
quiet.
final loading protocols.
The empty streets filled slowly as people came out of the shelters. They came out carefully at first, the way people do when they have been afraid for a long time and are not quite ready to stop being afraid. They stepped into the open air and looked up at the sky and looked at the buildings that were still standing and at the ones that were not. The northern district had taken some damage from the early bombardment. Before the Earth fleet arrived, the Vorkai had already begun
The
their
unbroken
work.
promise is
3
ready.
buildings were rubble.
Affirmative.
The road
Proceed
leading
with
to the
final
main
loading
river
protocols.
crossing had a long black scar across it from an energy strike that had hit the pavement and kept going. 2 of the public gardens that the Kilvori kept with great care were burned on one side. The old trees there reduced to bare black shapes against the gray sky. People looked at these things. They did not make much noise. They just looked, and then they began to move, some toward the shelters to check on family, some toward the damaged
unbroken
areas
promise
with
is ready.
tools and hands.
Affirmative.
Already
Proceed
beginning the
with final
process
loading
of figuring
protocols.
out what could be fixed and what had to be rebuilt. Sathrek walked through the city in the morning rain. He was tired in the way you are tired after something big has happened, not sleepy exactly, but emptied out, like a container that has been filled and then pulled. He had not slept. He had been on communication lines all night, coordinating with the Planetary Defense Command, with the remaining sovereignty channels that were now suddenly
The
very
unbroken
interested
promise
in
is
talking
ready.
to him, with his own
Affirmative.
staff.
Proceed with final loading
He had also
protocols.
received a request from the Earth Fleet. Admiral Akefer wished to send a diplomatic representative to the surface for a formal first contact meeting. He had replied that he would be honored and named the time and place himself. The old assembly room at the base of the communications tower. The next morning, at the hour when the amber sun came over the eastern hills. He arrived early.
The unbroken
Dr.
promise is
Yumiko
ready.
Hara came down in a shuttle
Affirmative.
with 2
Proceed
other
with
crew
final loading
members and
protocols.
1 security officer who walked behind her and tried to look inconspicuous and did not quite manage it. She carried nothing except a small data pad and the knowledge she had been building since the signal first came through. The city she descended into was beautiful even in its damaged state. She could see that, the way the low curved buildings sat together, the design of the wide river walks, the careful way the Kilgore
The
had
unbroken
arranged their
promise is
public
ready.
spaces, so that
Affirmative.
every open
Proceed
area
with
had both
final
sun
loading
and
protocols.
shade. It was a city built by people who thought about where they put things and why. She noted all of this in the way she noted everything, with genuine interest rather than professional cataloging. Sathrek was waiting at the door of the assembly room when she arrived. He was older than she had expected, though she was not sure why she had expected anything specific. He was tall for Kilvori, with deep green scales and eyes
The
that were
unbroken
old
promise
and
is
clear,
ready.
and looked at her with a
Affirmative.
directness that
Proceed
she
with
found
final loading
immediately
protocols.
comfortable. He bowed in the Kilvori formal style, a slow dip of the head with both hands held forward, open. She had practiced this. She returned it as correctly as she could. Something in his face shifted slightly. Not surprise exactly, more like a note being taken. They went inside and sat across a low table from each other. Tea was brought, a Kilvori drink, amber and light.
The
that
unbroken
tasted
promise
like
is
warm
ready.
wood and something faintly
Affirmative.
sweet.
Proceed with final
Hara
loading
accepted it
protocols.
and held the cup in both hands because that was what the cultural file had told her was respectful, and she saw him notice that too. For a while, they talked through the practical things, the immediate humanitarian needs of the planet. What the Earth Fleet could provide, medical supplies, they had brought those, knowing they would be needed. Engineering support for the structural damage, communications assistance. These were easier things
The unbroken
to talk
promise
about.
is ready.
They had clean answers.
Affirmative.
They could
Proceed
be
with
handled.
final loading protocols.
Then the practical part was finished, and a small silence sat between them. Sathrek looked at her for a moment. He wrapped his long hands around his own cup. I want to ask you something directly, he said. His voice was careful and considered, as if each word was being placed down rather than spoken. I would like an honest answer, not a diplomatic one. I'll do my best, Harley said.
The unbroken
Why did you
promise
come?
is ready.
He asked. Not the
Affirmative.
political
Proceed with
explanation,
final
not
loading
the official
protocols.
language. We are a small people. We are nothing in the scale of the galaxy. We have no resources that Earth needs. We have no strategic value to it. The sovereignty was not going to thank you for this, and they did not. You spent ships and lives in a system that you have no official connection to. He looked at her steadily. I have spent the night trying to understand, and I cannot find the calculation that makes this make sense.
The
Harley said her
unbroken
cup
promise
down.
is ready.
She had thought about
Affirmative.
how to
Proceed
answer
with
this
final
question
loading
since before the
protocols.
fleet left Earth. She had gone through several versions, careful versions, diplomatic versions that framed it as policy or principle or strategic long-term thinking. She had dismissed all of them on the shuttle down. He had asked for honesty. She would give him honesty. In 2291, she said, we had a plague. She watched his face. Something moved behind his eyes.
The
It
unbroken
was
promise
killing
is
us,
ready.
she continued. Our
Affirmative.
research was
Proceed
not
with
fast
final
enough.
loading protocols.
We asked the sovereignty for help and received notes of concern. We asked every spacefaring civilization we had contact with. Nobody moved. She paused. And then a data package arrived. Biological research, exactly what we needed. It came from Kelvori Prime. No warning, no introduction, no request for anything in return. Just the research, and it saved us. Sathrek was very still. We know what it cost.
The unbroken promise is ready.
Said. The sovereignty
Affirmative.
reduced
Proceed
your
with
trade
final
access.
loading protocols.
Your council seat was downgraded. You were penalized for acting outside official channels. She looked at him directly. You never complained. You never told anyone what you had done. You just accepted the consequences and moved on. A long pause. How do you know about the consequences? He asked quietly. Because we paid attention, she said. We were the ones you helped. We made it our business to understand
unbroken
what
promise
happened
is
to you
ready.
because of it. We
Affirmative.
watched.
Proceed
For
with final
96
loading
years,
protocols.
We watched. We were not powerful enough to do much about it for a long time, but we remembered. Sathric set his cup down on the table. He looked at her. There are people alive on Earth today, Hara continued more quietly, who are only alive because of something your scientists did. Their children are alive. Their grandchildren. 70,000 in the first year. More after that. They don't know your name. They don't know where the research came from.
The
but
unbroken
they are
promise
alive.
is ready.
She let that sit.
Affirmative.
For a moment.
Proceed with
You didn't
final
think
loading
anyone was
protocols.
watching. You did it anyway. That matters. The assembly room was quiet. Outside, the rain continued its soft roll. Somewhere in the street, the sound of people beginning to move things and fix things drifted in through the old walls. Sathric looked up. We did not do it expecting anything, he said. We know, Hara said. That's part of why we came. He looked at her for a
The
long
unbroken
moment.
promise is
Then
ready.
he picked up his cup again.
Affirmative.
His
Proceed
hands,
with
she
final
noticed,
loading
were not
protocols.
quite steady. Our people have a word, he said. There is no good translation. It means approximately the debt that exists between those who have helped each other, even when neither one knew they were building. He looked at the table. I did not think it still applied to us. After so long, I thought we had been forgotten. Not by us, Harvey said. He nodded once, slowly, with a heaviness
The
that was
unbroken
not
promise
sadness,
is ready.
but something weightier.
Affirmative.
The feeling
Proceed
of
with
putting
final
down
loading
something you
protocols.
have carried for a very long time. They sat together in a quiet room while the rain fell outside, and for a while neither of them spoke, because there was nothing more that needed to be said just then. 3 days after the battle, Admiral Akafer was summoned to speak before a special emergency session of the Galactic Sovereignty Council. She attended via long-range communication from the bridge of
The unbroken promise is ready.
Her image appearing on the
Affirmative.
council chamber's
Proceed with
main
final
screen
loading
as a
protocols.
live transmission. The council chamber was a vast circular room at the Sovereignty's central station, and it was full. Every major member civilization had sent representatives. Some of them had not been in the same room together for years. The session opened formally. The Sovereignty's presiding officer, a Threnite diplomat named Ambassador Cale, tall and silver-skinned and possessed of a voice like polished stone,
The unbroken promise
outlined
is
the
ready.
situation.
Affirmative.
The United Earth
Proceed with
Defense
final
Command
loading
had, without
protocols.
authorization, entered a declared military zone and engaged a foreign power. This was a violation of sovereignty protocol. There were members present who wished to discuss sanctions. There were members present who wished to discuss Earth's status within the broader sovereignty framework. There were members who had quite strong feelings about a species that had been largely peripheral now, inserting itself into galactic affairs.
The unbroken promise is ready.
Akeffer listened
Affirmative.
to all
Proceed
of this
with
without
final loading
expression.
protocols.
When Ambassador Kale invited her to respond, she leaned forward slightly toward the communication lens. "Thank you," she said. "I would like to put something in front of the Council." She nodded to the communications officer on the unbroken promise, who transmitted a document to the Council Chamber's display system. It appeared on the main screens for every member to see. It was a list.
The unbroken
A
promise
long
is
list,
ready.
12 items.
Affirmative.
Each
Proceed
item
with
was
final
the name
loading
of
protocols.
A civilization, a species, a world, a culture, followed by 2 columns of data. In the first column, the date their distress signal had been received by the sovereignty. In the second column, the sovereignty's response. Pending review, pending review, pending review, under assessment, diplomatic note sent, pending review. 12 names, 12 responses.
The unbroken promise
12
is ready.
civilizations that were now
Affirmative.
either conquered,
Proceed with final
destroyed,
loading
or
protocols.
absorbed into the Vaukai dominion. The council chamber was very quiet. Akeffer let them look at it for a full minute. She did not rush. "I want to be clear," she said, when the minute was done. "I am not here to accuse this council of cowardice or bad faith. I understand that the sovereignty is a complex body with competing interests and significant political constraints. I understand that unilateral
The unbroken
military
promise is
action
ready.
creates precedents that are
Affirmative.
legitimately
Proceed with
concerning.
final loading protocols.
I understand all of that." She paused. But 12 civilizations asked for help, and nobody came. And when the 13th asked for help, we came, and the Vaukai fleet withdrew. Another pause. "You are within your rights to sanctions. You are within your rights to review our status in the sovereignty framework. You can do whatever the rules of this council allow you to do." She looked directly into the communication lens.
The
so that
unbroken
her eyes
promise
met
is
the
ready.
screen in the council chamber as
Affirmative.
directly as
Proceed with
possible.
final loading
But we will
protocols.
tell you this. The next time a signal comes in from any species in any system, we will answer it. We will answer the one after that. We will keep answering. That is not a threat. It is a statement of what we are and what we do. She sat back. Ambassador Kale looked at her across several light minutes of space. The silence in the council chamber lasted a long time. In the end,
unbroken promise
no
is ready.
sanctions were formally proposed.
Affirmative. Proceed
Several
with final
members
loading
requested
protocols.
additional discussions. Several others quietly moved to update their own emergency communication protocols. The session was closed without resolution, which in sovereignty terms often meant that the matter had been quietly set aside because nobody had found a good argument for the opposing position. Akeffer closed the communication link and sat in the quiet of the bridge. Solano came to stand beside
The
her.
unbroken promise
He had
is
listened
ready.
to the whole thing.
Affirmative.
"You think
Proceed
they'll
with
call
final
again,"
loading
he
protocols.
said, meaning the council, meaning the sovereignty. "Eventually," she said. And we'll go to those too." He nodded. He almost said something else. Then he just nodded again and went back to his station. In the engine room, Bram Osa was filing his post-engagement maintenance report. The hull fracture from before the battle, the one he had patched during the FTL jump, he
The
listed
unbroken
under
promise is
routine
ready.
maintenance, nodding only
Affirmative.
the repair
Proceed with
type and
final loading
materials
protocols.
used. He filled in the date, initialed the form, and moved on to the next item. His supervisor would review the report the following week and noticed nothing unusual. On the 4th day, a young Kelvori soldier came to find Elder Sathar. It was the same young soldier who had stood beside him during the battle, Teva. She found him in his office, working through the long stack of administrative
The unbroken
tasks
promise is
that a
ready.
crisis always leaves
Affirmative.
behind it.
Proceed with final
He looked
loading
up when she
protocols.
knocked. "What is it?" he said. She was holding something, a printed document, the kind that humans apparently used for official correspondence, off-white paper with text in 2 languages. She held it out to him. It came from their fleet, she said, for me. He took it and read it. It was a notification, an application received, a process begun. He read it twice, then
The
he looked up
unbroken
at her.
promise is ready.
You applied to their defense
Affirmative.
command.
Proceed with
he
final
said.
loading protocols.
Yes, she said. He looked at her for a moment, at her amber eyes and her straight posture and the way she held herself. Not quite a soldier yet, but almost. He thought about the night she had stood beside him watching the battle unfold on the screen, asking who those ships were. They have offices on 3 colony stations, she said. I found the application process through the communications officer on the Earth ship.
The
that was
unbroken
doing
promise
our
is
repair
ready.
Assessment.
Affirmative.
She helped me.
Proceed with
A small
final loading
pause.
protocols.
I want to do what they do. Sathrek looked at the document. He looked at the name of the agency printed at the top, United Earth Defense Command. He thought of the 487 ships that had come from nowhere, from a species that owed them nothing, to stand between his people and the worst thing they had ever faced. He handed the document back. Then do it, he said. She took it carefully.
The unbroken
She
promise
bowed
is
the
ready.
deep formal bow, not the quick
Affirmative.
one.
Proceed
Then
with
she
final
left.
loading protocols.
Sathrek looked at the empty doorway for a moment. Then he looked out the window at the city, where the rain had stopped and the amber sun was beginning to come through the clouds, touching the curve of the river and the tops of the low buildings and the people in the streets who were still, slowly, coming home. He thought about a ping that had come back in 4 minutes and 17 seconds. He thought about what that meant. He
The
thought about the
unbroken
young
promise is
soldier
ready.
walking out of his office
Affirmative.
with a document
Proceed
in
with
her
final
hands,
loading
and
protocols.
something new in her eyes. He turned back to his desk. He had a lot of work to do. And somewhere across the city, in the small temporary offices the Earth fleet had set up on the ground, a communications officer from the Sovereignty's relay station handed over her resignation and pulled up a different application form entirely. Her name was Velnol, and she had gray skin, large dark eyes, and a very precise
The
way of
unbroken
noticing
promise is
things
ready.
that most people miss.
Affirmative.
And she had
Proceed
made her
with final
decision
loading
quietly
protocols.
and completely during the 4 days since the battle, without drama and without regret. She filled out the form carefully, double-checking every answer. She submitted it. Then she sat back in her chair and looked out the window at the amber sky over Kilvori Prime, and she felt, for the first time in a long time, like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. 1 year was enough time to see what had changed.
The unbroken promise is ready.
Some things had changed
Affirmative.
completely.
Proceed with
Some
final
had barely
loading
changed
protocols.
at all. The galaxy was large and old and slow to move, and one battle in one star system, even a battle that had sent the Vorkai Dominion retreating for the first time in 3 decades, was not enough to remake it all at once. The Sovereignty still met. The Council still deliberated. The great powers still wrote careful diplomatic notes and assessed political costs, and moved with the measured slowness
The unbroken
of
promise is
institutions
ready.
that have existed for centuries.
Affirmative. Proceed
and
with
intend
final
to
loading
exist
protocols.
for centuries more. But things had changed, quietly, in the way that important things often change, not all at once, but in the accumulation of small shifts, each one barely noticeable alone, that add up over time to something different. The Vorkai Dominion had gone quiet. Not silent, they were still there, still a power in the region, still the most dangerous military force in the sector by most
The
measures,
unbroken promise
but they
is
had
ready.
not moved.
Affirmative.
In the 12 months
Proceed
since the
with
retreat
final
from
loading
Kelvori
protocols.
Prime, there had been no new campaigns, no new signals of imminent attack against any neighboring civilization. Their fleet had returned to their core systems and stayed there. Their diplomatic channels, usually silent, had begun, tentatively, to show some activity. Quiet conversations. Exploratory messages. Nothing significant yet, but the pattern of 30 years of constant expansion had, for the first time,
The
paused.
unbroken promise is ready.
Analysts at the Sovereignty
Affirmative.
spent a
Proceed
great
with
deal
final
of time
loading
trying
protocols.
to explain this. Some argued that the Vorkai were simply recalculating, gathering new resources, preparing for the next campaign more carefully. Some argued that the loss at Kilvori Prime had damaged their military credibility internally, and and that there were political struggles happening within the Dominion that the outside galaxy could not yet see. Some argued that the Vorkai, for the first time, had genuinely
The unbroken promise is ready.
an unknown
Affirmative.
force,
Proceed
an
with final loading
unpredictable
protocols.
tactical style, a species they could not model, and that they were waiting until they understood what they were dealing with. All of these analyses might have been correct. They might all have been partially correct. What was certain was the result. For 1 year, the Vorkai had not attacked anyone. 3 civilizations that had been quietly watching the Vorkai's advance and calculating how much time they had left before the ships arrived.
The unbroken
and their
promise is
borders
ready.
were still intact.
Affirmative.
Their people
Proceed
were
with
still
final
alive.
loading protocols.
Their cities were still standing. For now, the gap held. On Kelvori Prime, they built a monument. It was not a military monument. There were no weapons depicted in it, no ships, no representations of battle. The artist who designed it, a young Kelvori sculptor named Myra, who had spent the battle in a shelter with her 2 children and had come out of the experience with something clear and specific to say.
The unbroken promise
had
is
spent
ready.
3 months on the design.
Affirmative.
And
Proceed
rejected
with final
17
loading
versions
protocols.
before she arrived at the final one. It was a simple thing at the end. A sphere of dark stone representing a planet. Not specifically Kelvori Prime, any planet, all planets. Beside it, carved in relief on a long panel of pale stone, a single line reaching inward from the edge, the universal visual shorthand for a signal being sent into space. And at the tip of that line, not an explosion or a fleet
The
or a
unbroken
dramatic
promise is
image of
ready.
salvation, but a
Affirmative.
small,
Proceed
clean
with
symbol,
final loading
a hand
protocols.
open. The inscription ran along the base of the panel in 2 languages, Kelvori first, then below it in English, which had been included because the sculptor felt it was right, because the monument was as much for the ones who came as for the ones who called. The inscription read, "They did not know us, they came anyway." Sathrek attended the unveiling ceremony on a warm afternoon.
The
in
unbroken
early
promise
part of
is
the
ready.
Kelvori spring.
Affirmative.
The amber
Proceed
sun
with
was
final
high,
loading
and the
protocols.
moons were just visible on the western horizon, and the air smelled of the flowers that grew along the river. Several hundred people had gathered. Most of them were quiet during the ceremony, the way people are quiet when they are trying to hold something large inside themselves. Some of the Earth crew were there. Admiral Akafer had returned to the system for the ceremony. She stood at the edge of the gathered crowd in her uniform, alone
The unbroken
except for
promise
Salam,
is ready.
who stood beside her with his
Affirmative.
hands
Proceed
behind
with
his
final
back,
loading
and
protocols.
his expression quiet and unreadable in the way it always was when he was thinking about something deep. Dr. Harville stood closer to the front, near Saffron, having built enough of a relationship with him over the past year that standing close felt natural. When the cloth came down and the monument was revealed, Myra stood beside it with her 2 children, old enough now to walk and look around, and not fully understand yet. And
The
Sathrek
unbroken
read
promise
the
is ready.
inscription aloud in Kelvori.
Affirmative. Proceed
and
with
someone
final
else
loading
read it in
protocols.
English. And then there was a long silence that was not empty but full. Akafer looked at the inscription. She read it. She did not say anything. She stood there for a moment with the warm spring air moving around her and looked at those words. And what she felt was too complicated and too personal to describe. So she did not try to describe it to anyone. She just stood there and let it be what it was. Solano beside her
The unbroken
also
promise
said
is
nothing.
ready.
After a moment,
Affirmative.
he cleared
Proceed
his
with
throat
final
quietly,
loading protocols.
ready to head back up. "1 more minute," she said. He nodded and he waited. She took her 1 more minute. Then she turned and they walked back toward the shuttle landing area. And the monument stood where it had been placed, and the people of Kelvori Prime moved around it. And some of them stopped to read, and some of them just touched the stone with their hands for a moment before they moved on. On Earth,
The
a
unbroken
girl
promise
watched
is ready.
footage.
Affirmative.
She was 9 years
Proceed
old.
with final loading
Her
protocols.
name was Adiz, and she lived in the eastern part of Lagos, and she had found the footage on her tablet the way children find things, not by searching for it specifically, but by following a chain of curiosity from one thing to another until she arrived somewhere unexpected. The footage was not classified. The United Earth Defense Command had released an official record of the Kelvori mission, partial footage from external hull
The unbroken
cameras,
promise is ready.
sensor logs, some
Affirmative.
audio.
Proceed with
The
final
dramatic
loading
part,
protocols.
the moment the fleet dropped out of FTL into the Calvori system, was a sequence that had been shared across every network, in every language, on every inhabited world that humans touched. 487 ships dropping out of jump space in sequence, the stars visible behind them, the amber glow of Calvori Prime below, the fleet arranging itself into formation, moving with a kind of coordinated
The
purpose
unbroken
that
promise
looked
is
almost
ready.
beautiful even when you
Affirmative.
understood what
Proceed
it was
with
for.
final loading
The whole
protocols.
sequence lasted about 90 seconds of real time, captured from a camera on the trailing edge of the destroyer reservoir, wide angle, sharp. Adiz watched it 3 times. She watched it a 4th time, more slowly. She was not entirely sure what she was feeling. She was 9, and she did not yet have all the words for all the feelings. But there was something in it that grabbed at something inside her and would not let go.
The unbroken
ship's
promise is
moving,
ready.
the formation
Affirmative.
taking shape.
Proceed with
The
final
sense,
loading protocols.
The clear, visible sense of purpose, of people who knew why they were doing something and were doing it completely. She watched it a 5th time. Then she put down her tablet and looked at the ceiling of her room for a while, and thought about the things she wanted to be when she was old enough to be things. She had already had 3 different answers to that question over the past 2 years. None of them had stuck. They had all been interesting
The unbroken
for a while,
promise is ready.
and then become something else.
Affirmative. Proceed
Something
with
that
final
felt
loading
more
protocols.
like the right answer the longer she thought about it. She was beginning to think she had her answer now. She picked up the tablet again and pulled up the United Earth Defense Command's public information page, the one she had found linked from the footage. It had sections for recruitment, for academy programs, for youth interest registration. There was a section for educational programs starting as young as 12.
The
She
unbroken
read that
promise is
section
ready.
carefully.
Affirmative.
Then she closed
Proceed
the
with final
tablet
loading
and went to find her
protocols.
mother, because there were some things you wanted to tell someone else before they became fully real inside you. The unbroken promise returned to regular patrol duty 6 weeks after the Calvori ceremony. Their assigned area was a wide stretch of space at the edge of the contested zone, the border region between sovereignty space and the sectors that were either ungoverned or under Volkite influence.
The
It was not
unbroken
a
promise
quiet
is ready.
posting. There were things
Affirmative.
to watch,
Proceed with final
things to
loading
respond
protocols.
to, the constant work of maintaining a presence in a region that needed one. The crew settled back into the rhythms of patrol duty, watch rotation, maintenance schedules, training exercises, the small domestic rituals that keep a ship's community healthy over long deployments. Solano ran his tactical exercises. Hara maintained the communication protocols with the nearby
The
inhabited
unbroken
system.
promise is ready.
Bram Oates
Affirmative.
tended
Proceed
to the
with
engine
final
room
loading
with the same
protocols.
steady thoroughness he always gave it, fixing things before they became problems, leaving no report empty, keeping the great ship running exactly as it should. Akefa ran the ship. She ran it the way she ran everything, with directness and care, paying attention, making decisions cleanly, not wasting the trust her crew gave her. She knew each of her people well enough to know when they were tired and when
The
they were
unbroken
sharp,
promise is
and when
ready.
they needed something she could
Affirmative.
give,
Proceed
and when
with
they needed
final
something
loading
she could
protocols.
not. She took care of them the way a good commander takes care of their people, which is to say constantly, and without making it look like effort. Teva had completed the first stage of her application process and was, as of 3 months ago, officially enrolled in a preliminary training program at the Earth Colony Station on the edge of the sector. Sathrek had sent Akafa a short message when the enrollment was confirmed. The message
The
said
unbroken
only,
promise is ready.
"Thank you for leaving the door
Affirmative.
open."
Proceed with
Akafa
final
had
loading
read it and
protocols.
written back. She opened it herself. The patrol continued. The weeks moved. The space around them was quiet in a specific way that borders are quiet, not peaceful exactly, but watchful, tending. And then at 2:17 hours on a Tuesday, the signal came. It arrived on the standard wideband frequency, the kind that was used specifically when you wanted to reach as many people as possible.
The unbroken
because
promise is ready.
You were not sure who was
Affirmative.
listening,
Proceed
and you
with
needed
final
someone
loading
to hear you.
protocols.
The communications officer on night watch caught it first and ran it through the translation protocols, and then called the duty officer, and the duty officer read it and called the bridge. Akafra was on the bridge in 7 minutes. She was not fully dressed. She had her jacket open and her hair not yet in its usual order, but her eyes were clear and fully awake. She read the message.
The unbroken
Unknown
promise is
species.
ready.
Coordinates attached.
Affirmative. Proceed
A
with
brief,
final
plain
loading
description
protocols.
of the situation, ships surrounding them, no allies nearby, time running out. The message was not well written. The translation was rough, but the meaning was not complicated. Someone was surrounded and afraid and calling for help because they had no other options. The coordinates resolved on the navigation chart, 6 weeks away at maximum FTL. Akafra looked at the message for a moment.
The unbroken promise is
Then
ready.
she looked up.
Affirmative.
Get me fleet
Proceed with
command,
final
she
loading
said,
protocols.
and plot the course. The communications officer opened the line. The navigation officer pulled up the chart. Around the bridge, the night watch crew moved into the quiet efficiency that comes from having done something before and being ready to do it again. Solano arrived on the bridge 4 minutes later, partially dressed, one sleeve still unbuttoned. He looked at the navigation chart. He looked at the coordinates.
The unbroken promise
He
is
was
ready.
already thinking. She could
Affirmative.
see it in his
Proceed
face.
with final
The
loading
sideways
protocols.
working quality of his thinking, beginning to map the space around the unknown coordinates, building preliminary pictures. Dr. Hara arrived a minute after that. She went straight to the communication station and pulled up the raw signal. She would start building a language profile immediately. 6 weeks was not a lot of time, but it was enough to learn basic patterns. It was enough to arrive ready to speak. In the engine
unbroken
room,
promise is ready.
Bram Osa received the
Affirmative.
order to prepare
Proceed with
for
final
extended
loading
high-speed
protocols.
transit. He put down the coolant seal he had been inspecting and called his team. His voice was the same as always, slow, steady, carrying no particular drama. "We're moving," he said. "Make it ready." On the bridge, Akafra confirmed the course and looked at the main screen. The stars ahead were still and bright in the dark, and somewhere among them, 6 weeks away, an unknown species
The unbroken
was calling
promise is
into
ready.
the void because they had no one
Affirmative.
else to
Proceed
call.
with final loading
They
protocols.
did not know anything about Earth. They did not know anything about the humans who were now reading their words. They did not know about Kilvori Prime, or the battle that had been fought there, or the monument that stood in Spring City with an inscription in 2 languages. They did not know about the girl in Lagos who was reading about recruitment programs. They did not know about a young Kilvori soldier beginning her training at the colony station at the
The
edge of the
unbroken
sector.
promise is ready.
They did not know about any of it.
Affirmative. Proceed with
They
final
only
loading
knew
protocols.
They were afraid, and there was no one coming. They were wrong about that last part. The unbroken promise moved. Its drives engaged with a deep, clean sound that traveled through the hull and into the feet of everyone aboard. The stars ahead shifted as the ship accelerated, pulling toward the jump corridor that would take them to the unknown coordinates on the navigation chart. Other ships began to move behind
The
them.
unbroken promise
The
is
fleet
ready.
assembled in the dark the way
Affirmative.
it always
Proceed
did,
with final
not
loading
slowly,
protocols.
not with ceremony, but with the practiced speed of people who have done this before and understand what it means. Ship after ship, falling into formation, drives igniting one after another in the dark of deep space. Akafra watched them assemble on the rear view display. All those ships, all those people, moving toward the sound of someone who had called for help and did not expect an answer. She turned back
The
to the
unbroken
forward
promise
view.
is ready.
The jump corridor
Affirmative.
opened,
Proceed with final loading
and somewhere,
protocols.
in a part of the galaxy that no human had ever visited, in a star system whose name they did not yet know, a people sat in the dark and waited and were afraid, not yet knowing that 487 drives had just ignited on their behalf, not yet knowing that something old and stubborn and impossibly loyal to the idea of showing up was already moving through the stars toward them. They
The
thought
unbroken
no one would
promise
come.
is ready.
They were wrong.
Affirmative. Proceed with
They had
final loading
always been
protocols.
wrong about that. Because there was one species in the galaxy, young, and sometimes foolish, and sometimes frightened, and sometimes mistaken, and never ever perfect, that had made a decision a long time ago, so deep inside itself that it was not a policy or a strategy or a doctrine, but simply a fact about what they were, that when someone calls for help, you answer. You answer the first call.
The unbroken promise
You
is
answer
ready.
the call after that.
Affirmative.
You
Proceed
keep
with final
answering.
loading protocols.
And so the fleet moved through the dark between stars, and the galaxy turned slowly around them. And far behind, on a warm green planet bathed in amber light, a monument stood in the spring air with an inscription in 2 languages. And the river caught the sun and turned it to gold. And somewhere above, among all the cold, bright stars, something was moving toward the sound of fear with open hands.
The
Answering.
unbroken promise is ready.
Always answering.
Affirmative.